I think I'll go on my phone.
Could not have timed that more perfect.
What a way to start.
What a way to start the show.
Did you start yourself?
We are joined by one of our favorite guests of the show tonight. It's already off to a great start. The pre-show, we basically made Gary sit and wait, and that was a bit of his revenge right there. But it's awesome to have him on the show. Welcome, everybody. Happy Monday. We thank you for spending it with us for a little bit of time here. Tonight's show, Ginger Runner Live, episode number 164. Well, I'm going to say now is probably going to be one of our favorite episodes. It's already started.
Maybe. I mean,
maybe.
We'll see.
We started the show already off to a great start. Our guest tonight is a dear friend of ours, has just been one of the kindest people in the sport to us. He's paced me at my first 100-miler, basically helped me not die. He's opened his races to us and his home, and he's just one of the kindest dudes, but also one of the most talented athletes in the sport today. Currently has the fastest on time around Mount Rainier, has attempted the Barkley marathons twice. We're going to talk to him a lot about that today. That's one of the main reasons why we have him on the show today. We're going to talk about his recent experience at the Barkley marathons here at 2017. And we're going to talk a little bit about beyond that, because he has some pretty big stuff planned for this year. He's not done. Like 2017 is not done for this guy. So I'm so excited to have Gary Robbins on the show tonight. Yay. Fresh, well, not fresh, more like relaxed off of the Barkley Marathons experience.
Fresh from the Oilers playoffs.
Fresh from the Oilers playoff. Perfect. So welcome, everyone. Sit back, relax, grab your beverage of choice. Get ready. Ginger Runner Live begins now. Ginger Runner. Yeah, what is up, everybody? Happy Monday. Happy Ginger Runner Live, episode number 164. My name is Ethan Newberry, your host, the Ginger. The hair is out. It's very poofy tonight.
Speaking of hair, Alex Brunhober in the chat room says, Kim and Gary deserve hair care product sponsors. Sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry.
What a way to start the show, guys. You do deserve hair product sponsors. Gary, less so. Maybe more like face products. I don't know. Maybe a razor sponsorship. I think that's what that would be great for Gary. That would not work. So you might have already heard his voice there in the background. We are joined tonight by one of the most talented athletes in the sport of ultra running, adventure running, distance running, Mr. Gary Robbins. This year, he's already done some incredible things, including attempting the Barkley marathons and nearly completing this thing. We're going to talk to him all about the Barkley marathons experience, training for it, leading up to it, the day of, the 60 hours there. And we're also going to talk to him a little bit about future plans this year. He's got some big things planned. He's not even remotely done. He's just one of the kindest guys in the sport. It's awesome to have him on the show. And it is also during Oilers playoffs, and he's the #1 Oilers fan.
He's it.
He's it. There are no other Oilers fans. Gary is it. That's not true.
That's very untrue.
That is very untrue. But it's so awesome to have him on the show. Welcome, Mr. Gary Robbins.
Yay!
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Cool. All right. See you later.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
What I should have clarified is that Gary has the biggest Oilers on his shirt fan.
It's true. Yes.
That barely made sense.
That barely made sense.
I am. It made no sense at all, but we're all used to this from Ethan. I am the Oilers' good luck charm. I have been to 3 playoff games over a span of 16 years. All 3 went to overtime, and all 3 were now historic Oilers victories. So I'm trying to get on the payroll to be flown in emergencies when games go to overtime and just be plucked into the rink to make sure that things go right.
I remember either you or Linda, your wife, saying that you had been to playoff games and it has gone into overtime every single time. And when you were there, they win in overtime.
Game. And it happened again when I went to Edmonton for Game 5 of the first round, and it went to overtime and stayed consistent with my my presence being such a positive factor in the result.
Well, I gotta say, you're probably batting 100 then. Just your presence at my 100-miler, I got to complete the entire 100 miles. I got my buckle thanks to Gary's presence. Gary's at the finish line of all of his races. They're hugging all of the runners. So if you get to finish one of his races, you get the Gary hug, which is just good luck for life. What else? I think that's it.
That's it.
That's pretty much it.
Bye.
So I want to remind those of you who might be tuning in live, of course, we are joined as well by...
I'm Kim, and I'm in the chat room as always. So if you guys have questions for Gary throughout the show, please ask them in the chat room. If you guys are with us week after week, you know the chat room's been kind of wonky, especially when it's busy. So if I don't see your question or if it isn't being asked, please ask it again.
Yeah, we're already at around 500 live viewers. That's going to continue to go up tonight since our guest is Mr. Gary Robbins, and a lot of people are interested in asking questions.
He's got a
Gary.
very big family.
Very big family.
It's true. It's true. My mother was one of 17, just so we get that off right off the top there.
So if you have questions for Gary, make sure you type them into the chat room. If Kim misses them, type them again. Yeah, Kim's basically pulling the questions aside as they come through. There's only so much that she can scroll through to get them. So keep them coming if you're watching live. If you're watching the archive version, keep the questions to yourself. I guess.
I'm sure you can reach out to Gary directly and ask him on social media.
Absolutely.
He's a very nice gentleman.
Sure, gentleman. Yeah, we'll say that. Gary, let's start the show talking a little bit about your prep for this year's Barkley Marathon. So it's not your first attempt at this event. You were there last year. We had the fortune of documenting as much of your race last year as possible. What was your draw to return to an event that was so difficult for you in 2016?
Absolutely. I think what we should actually start with, because it is a unique night for me in this regard, is the drinks of choice this evening. So I'm always reminding you this, but this is actually I'm breaking with tradition tonight. So you guys lead. What are you indulging in?
By the way, every time we have Gary on, we can't miss this part. Gary's always the one. Hey, let's talk about our drinks. I'm like, I didn't want to assume you were drinking.
There's already been people in the chat room being like, boxed wine, boxed wine, boxed wine.
Okay.
Kim and I are partaking in some Green Flash. It's a California. It's delicious for me. Actually. It is actually from our neighbor. We got a bunch of great beer from Scout, who's a viewer of the show.
Thank you, Scout, for sending us a whole box of beer
from like various breweries, but that's in the fridge getting
get
chilled.
In the fridge
so we weren't able to get it for tonight, but next week for sure. So we're enjoying Green Flash. It's one of my favorites. Kim's like,
I'm like not really enjoying it, but
that's why I buy it. So it's more for me. But Gary, obviously the big story is, what are you drinking?
Breaking with tradition. It is not a box this evening. I have acquired a bottle of wine. It is called Punto Final from Reserva Malbec, Chilean, I believe, Argentinian. A very good friend of mine congratulated me with a gift of a box of bottles of wine. And that's what I've been drinking for the last couple of weeks. So I wanted to point out that for the one and only time, I won't be just sucking it back out of a box tonight.
if this is your first time seeing Gary on Ginger Runner Live, just know that it's normally accompanied by a box or bladder of wine. And it devolves into one of the best viewing experiences I can imagine. But tonight, Gary's drinking like from a glass and a bottle.
Maybe we take a totally different tack here off the top. Maybe we could be a little classier throughout the evening. Your question was, why would I choose to go back to the Barkley after the first year? And I mean, that answer to me is obvious in that it is the race that is almost impossible to complete. And the goal for me from the start many years ago, before ever having the opportunity to line up for the first time in 2016, was to become to join the elusive list of finishers for that race. And last year I made it to the 5th and final lap and was not able to make it to the finish line. So I kind of confirmed for myself that I had to make up to accomplish what I wanted with that race and becoming a finisher. So, and I said to myself from the start that I would continue to go to this race until I could achieve the ultimate goal of finishing the damn thing.
For those who maybe are unfamiliar with the Barkley, we're not going to get into too much detail as to what this event is. There's a great documentary on Netflix, which I encourage you to watch, called The Barkley Marathon, the race that eats its young. We've also had Gary and Jared Campbell on the show previous, as well as John Kelly, this year's finisher. So we've gone into great depth as to what this event is. I guess also with that, Gary, because this event has become so publicized, there is a documentary about it that goes into great detail about Laz and the history of the race. It's been around for decades. What was your first experience or learning about this race? When you first heard about it, was it, I got to do that someday? Or was it, this is bonkers. You know, like
Well, it was
where were
interesting.
you in your sport at that time?
So I came into all of this through the goal and the inspiration to do expedition adventure racing. I didn't, ultra running wasn't a thing. 100-milers didn't exist in my mind. I didn't know what it was. I had seen Eco Challenge, knew what expedition race was. That's what brought me into the sport. And through years of doing that, it showed me that ultra running was going to be my true direction. So I learned of the Barkley very early on because it's a known thing in the expedition racing world. And I just remember thinking at the time how incredibly nuts it all sounded, but it was something that it piqued my interest early on, and I thought, okay, yeah, maybe one day that'll make sense as something I want to look at. And that was about 10 years ago. And then over a period of years, as I established myself as an ultra runner and a 100-mile runner, it got higher and higher up my hopeful to-do list. And in 2010, I was having a career year for myself. And in the previous year, in 2009, I had spoken to 3 finishers of the Barkley marathons and was going to apply in 2010 to try to run it in 2011. And I broke my foot and I missed a year. I had 2 back-to-back fractures, was on crutches for 8.5 months. And then it took me a few years to get back to where I wanted to be again and to finally accept once again, as I had been told, and I also knew, the Barkley has to be your everything. And that's what it was for me last year, and that's what it was this year, and that's what it will most certainly be in the next attempt, whether that's next year or 2 years from now, remains yet to be seen. But I will 100% go back and give it another go.
It's just something that for those who maybe are unfamiliar, we are documenting Gary's races. So we did in 2016, we did in 2017, and I will be making a movie out of this. And there's some chatter in the chat room about that. One thing that I did learn this year talking to you, Gary, and I guess it doesn't surprise me because every time I go back to an event that I've done before, you have that knowledge, you have that beta already in mind as to what to prepare for. In this case, you're preparing for an event that will change. So each year it changes, whether it gets harder or just different. And knowing how much you put out there in 2016 and how hard you worked and sleep deprivation and navigation and everything, what was the draw to go back? Was it just unfinished business? I mean, you knew that it was going to be worse and that it was going to be more pain, and you knew what you were in for. Was there any sort of stress or draw to that?
Well, it was very difficult to come to terms with not finishing last year and needing to go back again. And I think it's actually harder to accept the training that needs to occur in the time of year that needs to transpire, even more so than the race itself. You can't just magically show up a year later and hope that your fitness is where it needs to be to succeed. It's the months of difficulty leading into that is the challenge for you and for me and my family, for the person and their family. And that was what I was almost dreading more than anything, was not being able to really take the entire winter to enjoy skiing and not focus on training specifically for it. But it was unfinished business. Like I said, from the start, I intended to be a finisher of this race. I didn't know how well my first year would go. I had hoped that I had hoped in the first year I would find a way to finish. I was really pleased with the fact that I made it to the 5th lap. And again, from prior to ever even seeing Frozen Head State Park, wanting to be a finisher of the Barkley Marathons was very deep rooted within me, and I knew it was going to take over my life for a period of time. I didn't think it would be potentially 3 full years, but that's what it has become, and it's unfinished business, and I will continue to return until I can become an official finisher of the race.
We have great live questions. I do not want to ignore them, especially tonight, since we have Gary for a limited amount of time. So let's get some of those.
Sure. A question from Sherry in the chat room. What will be the deciding factor between attempting Barkley next year versus the following year? How will you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, really, it's more the fact that we don't need to make that decision right now. And we don't want to put that pressure on ourselves. It's myself, it's my wife, it's our kid, it's everything. And it is knowing what the winter becomes, the focus, and how that plays out for our family. So there was no pressure. We're aligned in the fact that we're 100% going to go back. And really, it's one of those, like, we figure after a couple of months, it's just going to be a natural, like, hey, let's do this next year, or hey, I think we should take an additional year to work our way back into it. I'll go as far as to say I'd be surprised if we didn't come to terms with going back next year, but I'm not going to put that on us just yet. It'll make sense to us in maybe another month or so is my guess.
Knowing what you know about training for this event, how was this year training for it different than the previous year? How were these two experiences different for you, even showing up at Frozen Head?
What was really difficult this year in North Vancouver, BC, is we had a historic year of snow. There is still, I just saw someone post a picture yesterday, at about 5,000 feet, 1,200 meters, there's still 25 feet of snow. Like someone just dug out a cabin on the Howe Sound Crest Trail 2 days ago, and they had to probe down to find the roof to dig out a window on it. And anyone that hasn't been that high in the mountains locally this year has no understanding of how much snow actually fell. And so it changed the training in terms of last year we had much less snow. The trails were much more open, lower down the mountain, and there were more options to choose from. And this year, because it snowed all the way into the city consistently, I had one option for training, and it was to do repeats on the BCMC Trail, which is an acronym for the British Columbia Mountaineering Club. And it's 853 meters, 2,750 feet in 1.9 miles, just under 3 kilometers. And because it's busy and it sees so many people on a day-to-day basis, the snow continually got packed down. So there's a trail to follow. But the strip was all of 2 feet, 1.5 feet wide. And if you stepped off of that, you literally sunk hip deep in the snow. So there was nowhere else to go because you were just post holing, or you needed snowshoes, or it was an impossibility. So this year, in contrast to last year, last year, certainly the bulk of my training happened on that same trail. But almost all of my training this year was with micro spikes on my feet, like a traction device, and was in snow from top to bottom. And I didn't have the luxury of being able to entertain running on other trails. It was just, this is the workout, this is where it has to happen. Even friends locally were like, why don't you go here? And I was like, I would love to go there, but there's 20 feet of snow and there's no trail, and I would have to bring my skis. So the difference this year was that it was weather-wise, it was much more challenging than it was 1 year ago.
I will also solidify that fact simply by stating that when I went to film Gary, coming from Southern California where it's beautiful and maybe there's some rain and
there's snow in the mountains.
There is snow in the mountains.
Snow yesterday.
But it's not like I'm training in it day after day after day. So weeks before Barkley this year, I was up there filming Gary very briefly. Literally, Gary, how long do I have to follow you to get some footage? Let's just do a mile up and a mile down. Great. Sounds great. An hour. I'm still injured. Like I'm still injured from that run. I got great footage. It's all in the trailer. You can go watch the trailer for the movie. But just to put it into perspective, this is Gary's training ground where he's doing this every day. And during that one day, that was your longest, last long effort before Barkley. Can you kind of go into detail about why you did what you did and what it is exactly that you did that night? I mean, it's insane.
I mimicked a lot of the training I did a year prior because it worked. I showed up in 2016 physically and mentally fit enough to accomplish the race. And I wanted to mimic it because it worked, and I did. I almost replicated it entirely. And the last workout I did this year and last year was to do a full overnight session. This year I started at 10 o'clock at night, went through till 8:30 in the morning. And the goal for the workout was to do 20,000 feet, 6,000 meters of climbing, up and down repeats on the mountain by headlamp while carrying all of my Barkley gear, which is about that night I think it was 8 pounds in the backpack, and not only taking aid from my vehicle once and just doing everything to replicate what the race would be. And Ethan was there, and we headed out together to get some footage. And I decided to do an out and back from one section. And on the way down, I hear Ethan go down, and I turn around and I see his headlamp on the ground behind me, and he gets up and he doesn't start to move, and he's just like, he starts to complain about how much he hurts. And in that moment in my head, I was like, I've got 12 hours to go. It's 10:30 and freezing cold. Can you just get through this right now so I can get this workout on? And then I later find out that it was a genuine fall, and unfortunately, you really did crank your butt on the rocks on the ground, and I felt bad afterwards for in that moment internalizing like, dude, seriously, let's go already.
It's one of those things where you're running with Gary Robbins. First of all, you're honored to be there in the presence of such a god.
Yeah.
So on the way up, I pop my adductor muscle. I pop it, and it's the injury that I still have to this day. But you don't tell Gary that. You don't tell Gary, hey, I know we've been going for like 15 minutes, but I think I just sustained one of the worst injuries of my running career. You don't say that. So I mentioned, oh, I think something popped. He's like, are you okay? I was like, yeah, I'm okay. So you just keep pushing. And Gary took me on a great route. What I can imagine on any day of the week, let alone at 11 p.m. at night during a rainstorm. It's gorgeous. Like, I imagine it's rough and tumble and just awesome. But yeah, I fell down a bunch on the way down. I got a nice big butt bruise. You can watch some previous episodes. I actually show it.
You texted me that night, and I think the first thing I said to you was, you didn't complain to Gary, did you?
I think I did. I think I was like, oh man, something's wrong. I should probably end this here. But regardless, that night for Gary was an incredible testament to the amount of training that goes into an event like this. So Gary, did you feel more prepared 2017? Or how was your strategy different going into this event? Very specific.
Yeah, and I mean, in comparison for 16 and 17, the thing that happened in 2016 is I got injured in that specific workout, the last workout. So I was very much freaked out going into Barkley, and there was another element for me to deal with tenosynovitis.
I took care of the injuries for you.
Yeah,
I took care of all of that.
You shielded me from that and took that with you back to California, and I managed to get through that workout without injuring myself. So I was in a much better space mentally. Actually, the funny thing is, I said to Linda a few days later, it was easier the year prior being injured because all of your anxiety got focused on the injury. Whereas this year, I wasn't injured. So the anxiety was just like all over the place. I was like, I don't know where to direct my crazy energy right now. And it was stressful leading into the race this year in a different regard over just heading back to it again. I felt like in 2016, I had a better mental focus from start to finish in the race, and that this year in 2017, I struggled a bit more getting into that zone. And that is because of the familiarity of the race, of the route. And I knew that would be a challenge this year. And it had been mentioned to me before that returning in the second year, you can lose sight of how hard you had to work a year ago. Like my recollection of 2016 is getting to lap 5, getting lost in the forest for 2.5 hours, making it to the 4th book, running out of time, and calling it a day, knowing that I didn't have the time to get through the course. And I'm in the race this year on the first lap, and I'm having issues with really just accepting the level of difficulty that I'm in for. And I had to remind myself that 1 calendar year ago, getting through the fun run, the 3 laps at Barkley, was to date the hardest 100-miler I had ever done in my life. 3 laps at the Barkley was harder than any other running event I had ever done. And you lose sight of that. And it's like, I'm struggling. And then I go, well, hold on a sec. This is going to be either the second hardest or the hardest thing you've ever done just to get to the 4th lap, let alone getting through to the 5th. So it took a bit to really get my head screwed on straight out there. And I struggled through the first lap. And there was a point where John Kelly and I separated, and he kind of went off the front a little bit after Ratjaw, and we were on our own. And I was like, okay, this is what it's going to be. I did a full Superman face plant. I hooked my foot on a wire coming down Ratjaw, whacked my knee, and just unleashed like a massive F-bomb. And I didn't do that throughout all of the first, right until up to the very end a year ago. And in that moment, that was me trying to pull back and gain focus and just get it all out, but recognizing it right there on the first lap at Ratjaw, like you need to really get yourself back in line here with what you're up against. And then I had to remind myself that you need to want the Barkley more than anything else in your life. And nobody wanted this more than John Kelly. He incredible. Congratulations to John Kelly. And one thing I do want to say is through all of the interviews I've done, I've implored every media outlet to mention John Kelly and to make sure that they weren't incorrectly representing what the finish was. I was disappointed that some media sources still chose to write the article they had pre-written before talking to me and not alter anything. So my apologies to John for anyone that didn't honor his finish. And I was saying to myself that no one wanted this more than John, and you can't finish the Barkley without wanting it more than anything. And I really had to pull myself back and remind myself of what I was up against, and thankfully got things back on track.
We've had John on the show. We actually had him pretty soon after the Barkley, and he's the kindest guy, the nicest guy. If you get a chance to, those of you who are watching live, please go watch John's interview. Actually just got a message from him right now.
Nice.
He's going to be in Los Angeles, so we're going to get a chance to actually see him, get some footage for this documentary and stuff. But
I hope he remembers his pants.
Yeah, please. Yeah, I hope he remembers his pants. That was really funny. But he's just the kindest, most down-to-earth guy. His family's incredible. I know, Gary,
family are phenomenal. They were so helpful to Linda. They really assisted her quite a bit in camp. So John Kelly has been run bike commuting to work for 3 years without any issues. And I guess today was the one day that he forgot his pants. And there were 4 new team members coming on board under him. So he had to work today with his business shirt and his bike shorts on. So it's a pretty funny picture.
It's hilarious.
I'm channeling my inner John Kelly today.
Yeah.
That's what's going on.
Kim also had a great comment. She's like, well, doesn't he always just bring along shopping bags? He could have thrown one of those on. We have lots of live questions. So I want to make sure we get to some of these before I can blabber all night.
Yeah, a question from Tyler Good in the chat room. Gary, what kept you motivated or focused during each lap and during the navigation confusion of the race? I
want this more than anything. Like, as much as I was reminding myself of that during the race. But you go through struggles out there. You go through massive highs and lows over a distance and a time frame that great. And it was reminding myself of why I was there, what I wanted from it, that being the finish, and that being because it was such an incredible challenge. And what we as a family with my wife and my kid had given to this and what it meant to us to be able to fulfill that. So that's where I would peel back mentally and remind myself of how much, not just myself, but Linda's mother moved to North Vancouver 6 months ago to help us raise our kid, which is amazing. And she was also a huge support figure to allow me to get the training in. And that's where the conversation it's not me deciding I'm going to do Barkley next year. It's me, it's Linda, it's her mother. It's us having a family discussion of, we know what it consists of, and it affects all of us. So reminding myself throughout the process, like how much I've given to this and how much it takes for my family to be on board with it.
And there's been a lot of people in the chat room kind of giving you kudos and praise for saying we more than saying me. And I think that's also it's really important. And it's easy for people to think of running as an individual sport or individual activity, and it really isn't.
Especially something like this event, just being an outsider and having the privilege of being there to at least document some of it. It's so clear that this is a team effort. One thing I wanted to ask, because this was what was really surprising to me. Gary, you are someone that I look up to. Is you can conquer anything. Any race that's set in front of you, any mountain that's put at your toes, you can conquer it, just because that's how I look at you. And I know, having talked to Linda and having interviewed both of you from before this event and before 2016, were you nervous? Like, is this the event that makes you nervous? And having your neck out there with a lot of the media coverage and a lot of the stories leading up to this event, did that make things worse? Yeah,
there was actually a question in the chat room from Lori Hall that actually ties into this as well. I think Lori asked, with making your training public, did you feel more anxiety or stress knowing that all eyes were on you, or did it help motivate you?
And that's a great question, and I appreciate that. And what actually was really happening there was, a year ago, I was offline for the event, and when I came back online, it was just completely in shock at the uptake that it had gotten, and that made the emotional recovery process much more complex, and the fear that always was the fear that I saddled the entire time was the failure being so public and knowing there was no way to escape that. And I was definitely, I knew that this was going to be seen by so many people, and I felt like I was taking a little bit of control back by posting my training, because I it wasn't to motivate me any further. It was to normalize the process of knowing that it was going to get uptake whether I wanted it to or not. It was going to get a massive following. And no matter what happened, succeed or fail, everybody was going to see, everybody was going to know. So I felt like it felt like it empowered me a little bit more to just be like, okay, here's what I'm doing. It made me feel like I had a bit more of a connection with the people that were following along, and helped to normalize how public the whole thing had become. And that's been a difficult part of it for sure, is like it would have been nice to have been able to really just step back and kind of in silence or private deal with everything afterwards. And I ended up getting woven very deep into the fabric of this race and the story for how it all ended up unfolding in the end.
It was in 2016, seeing John Kelly start his 5th loop was one of the toughest things to witness.
That was ridiculous. Like I didn't
crazy.
see it personally. I saw the footage afterwards, and it was just phenomenal to see someone. And from what I read, Laz actually stepped aside and kind of went and hid a little bit afterwards and shed a tear because he was so taken aback by what John had done. He had seen someone go to their absolute brink, which is what he kind of asks of people in the race. He doesn't expect people to finish, but he does expect people to give their everything. And what John Kelly did a year ago was give as every ounce that he had. He collapsed 100 meters up from camp on the 5th lap and took a nap, and I saw the footage. He was like a dead man walking, like a zombie when he came into camp. And that's the stuff that Laz is looking for from people when they show up there.
It's something that when you are in the ultra world, you see carnage at 100 milers, you see it at 50 milers or 100K, you see people struggling. It was the first time that I'd ever seen anything like that, where a person had gone so far beyond their possible that they are essentially walking dead. And it was tough to watch. This year, I honestly didn't think that those visuals would ever get topped in my mind. This year was really, really hard to watch and to witness, because again, you're watching a hero, come into the gate from the opposite direction, and you're telling Laz that I completed it, I got all the books, I got all the pages, but you're obviously coming from the wrong direction. At that point, were you coherent? What was going through your mind at that moment, if anything at all? And you're welcome to take this back and kind of tell the story of how you arrived, because some people might not fully know it.
Well, I think it's actually worth, this will be a bit of an extended answer, because I feel like it really has to go back a little bit further to put it all in context. So 5th lap, and I was confident. We had enough time, had almost the exact same amount of time as we had, Jared and I had a year ago. I knew the course. I was feeling confident about the books on course, and I felt strong and went to work, and it was the middle of the night, and made some navigational errors, but nothing drastic and nothing that you wouldn't expect to do on lap 5 in the middle of the night, and was clicking off books and had basically come through the halfway point of the course, or just past that, in 6.5 hours, and was getting into the area that I was even more comfortable with. So as much as you keep your emotions in check, I had this little surge of like, oh, this is happening. Like, this is it. I've cleared the really hard part, and I'm getting into the stuff that should be a bit more comfortable for me. And then day broke, and it just started to trickle a little bit of rain, and I had taken my rain gear with me, and and then it started to rain a little bit. And I was like, oh, I'll probably put on my rain gear, I guess, in 20 or 30 minutes. And then the skies just opened up. It was like a deluge instantly. And by the time I could even get into my pack, I was just dripping wet. And it's like clay surface out there, so when it gets wet, it's really slick. But along with the rain came the fog. So I was now climbing up onto the high points in the counterclockwise direction into the final 6 books of the race, which 3 of those are up at about 3,000 feet. And I came up to one of the books right at about 3,000 feet. And as soon as I got there, I was just buried in fog where I couldn't see anything. And I stopped where I was. I took out my compass and took a bearing and navigated directly through this really thick fog to the rock where the book was hidden, and just had this like surge of positivity where I was like, I know what I'm doing. I know this course. I know how to navigate. This is it. Like, I've just faced a challenge in not being able to see where I was going and nailed it. And then I dropped down and grabbed, so there's a place on the course called Leonard's Butt Slide. And I had been told that when it's wet, it's because it's impossible to stand up. And sure enough, it was absolutely insane. Like it was like you were sliding down an absolute sheet of ice. Just, I had on long pants and I went for a ride down this thing, just down a slope, trying not to slam my tailbone into rocks or roots. And then you've got to pull yourself back up this slope, which is incredibly difficult. So I grabbed that. And then on the way to the next book, which is with 4 books to go in the race, there's a couple of bushwhacking sections, and I made my navigation moves, and I topped out just below the final few turns that would take me into the garden spot. And all of a sudden, nothing visually lined up, nothing made sense, and I had made an error, and I couldn't figure out why or how. And I stopped to try and address it, but what was happening is that I had run out of water. It was pouring rain. The rivers were starting to swell, and the fog had set in. And as soon as I stopped moving, I got hypothermic. So I couldn't even stop for 60 seconds. I was trying to align myself on the map. So I know that when I finished the race, I said 90 minutes, but it was at least 45, and if not 60. So at this time frame, up until then, I feel like I was on pace for a 12-hour final lap. Like I was on pace for a 59-hour finish, and I was closing strong. And I got to this area, and the fog had set in, and I spent upwards of an hour going in circles on top of a mountain, trying to stay warm, trying to figure out where I was, losing my mind, realizing the whole race was falling apart in front of me, and not being able to really piece it all together because I couldn't stop enough to, I couldn't take in calories. I had no fluids. I couldn't, there was no land markers. So finally the fog peeled back like 10 feet, and I saw a boundary marker, and I know that this area, the book is at the confluence of boundary markers in 2 directions, in a west, east, and north to south. And I went, this is it. This is the piece of information that can solve this for me. So I found the boundary marker, and I followed it, and I ended up coming up onto the plateau from the opposite direction. And I had never come from that direction, but as soon as I got there, I recognized that I was in the right place. And I shot over and grabbed the page from the book and looked at my watch, and I had 3 hours and 57 minutes to get to the finish line, which would be faster than we had covered that stretch at any point throughout the race. And the double problem was I had missed the water drop, and I knew I didn't have time to go back to get water, but I also knew where Critters Road was. So I knew that 3 hours and 57 minutes was technically not enough time, and I knew I couldn't get water, and I knew how to get off the mountain and accept my hypothermia and accept defeat and call it a day. And so I had a decision to make in that moment, and that decision was that I was going to entirely bury myself to make it to the finish line. And so God damn it. So I put my head down and I started running, and ended up this sucks that this is live. I just found myself in a really difficult place where I had to accept that I was up against the clock, and it was all but impossible, and I couldn't access any water. So what I did is I just put my head down and I started running and moving faster and harder than I had at any point in the race. And I managed to get to the 3rd book almost perfectly. While I was trying to get to that book, the rain was affecting the surface on some of the switchbacks, and the clay was so slippery that even on some of the switchbacks, my shoes couldn't even make it up. So I was like, I had to grab it at trees and dig my poles in just to make it up a switchback on a trail that was groomed because of how slippery it was getting. And I kept looking for sources of water to pull out of the streams, because you can drink out of some of the water on that side of the mountain. And the water was all just like thick soup brown because the rivers were swelling. So I got my 3rd book. I hadn't drank, and I was like, okay, you need water. So I pulled water from this water source, and I was like, you can't swallow this. This just has to be to wet your palate and allow you to get some calories in. So I start sipping and spitting water and getting calories in, and I'm just bolting, like running full on, like I could say 25K race pace, but it's probably like 50K race pace. But I am running right now because I know I don't have any grace period at all. And I know that I've given everything to get to this point and set myself up for success. And I'm not going to accept anything less than the finish that's right in front of me. So I get to the second book. And the interesting thing about the second book is it's the most challenging book in the race for me. And I know this because my partners last year, Jared, and this year, John, are so good at finding book 2 that we've never gotten lost really too much in that range for me to learn what it looks like around it.
Right.
And the way that the water was cascading down the mountain, it had created a chute in the single track of the footprints that people had utilized coming away from the book over the laps. And it was like the runway in Die Hard when the planes can't land and they light the runway on fire. And I got there and that was the thought I had where I was like, oh my God, it's like the runway in Die Hard. I just have to follow the water down the mountain. So I shot down the mountain and was continually confirming bearing. And I got to where the book would be. And the rivers that we had crossed 12 hours earlier without getting our feet wet were now knee deep. And everything had changed in there. So I spent about 10 minutes just running up and down the riverbank and trying to find the book, and I almost convinced myself that maybe it had washed away. So I was like, maybe the book is gone. Like the river is so high, I can just say I was here and I'll go in and I'll just, the book was gone, but I was there. And I was like, that's not how it works. That's not gonna, you can't do that. But it hasn't washed away. So I go back to the point where I believe the book should be. I cross the river. It looks like the point where John and I had crossed the river before. And with 2 books to go, I think my race is now about to end. And I turn around and I just scream into the river, into the forest. And as I let loose this scream, all of a sudden my world just comes down like this, and I'm staring at the book on the other side of the river. And I really, in that moment, I was like, this can't be real. Like, this can't actually be. And I was like, just stop thinking, get the page and keep going. So I went back across this knee-deep river and grabbed the page out of the book and turned around. And then I looked at the watch and I was like, okay, you've got less than 2 hours to get to the finish now. And the slope leaving from book 2 is super steep. And I think the previous lap, John and I had taken 20 or 25 minutes. And I've got this music on and I've got it on repeat and I've got it cranked. And it's just, I'm repeating a single song. And I've got my poles and I'm leaning into it and giving everything. And about every 1.5 to 2.5 minutes, one footstep would be 80% of what I had left in my body. And I would yell, I would scream at myself, like, focus, you come on. That's not acceptable. You need more, give me more. And I had the music on, so I couldn't hear myself as much as it was just trying to continue to find another bit of resolve within me. I got over this slope in 15 minutes. Which was faster than I had done it at any point during the race. I dropped down the opposite slope, and then you cross a river. And at that point, I was forced to start drinking this water. And I knew I would pay a price for that, which I did, but I knew it wouldn't happen in the race. So now I'm drinking this brown sludge water. And now I'm on this slope called Checkmate Hill, which is atrocious. It's over 2,000 feet, and it's just super steep and a nightmare. And same thing, I lean into it. I'm screaming at myself. I get up and over the top of it in, if not the best time of my race, certainly within a minute or two of it. I nail my navigation. I go right through the Plume of Doom and right to the top. And then I find the last book in the entire race. And I look at my watch, and I had timed our descent the previous lap. And I just went, I have all my pages, and I'm going to finish with 4 or 5 minutes to spare. I'm going to finish this thing in 59:55. And I turn around, and I just see the fog really start to drift down. Linda and Reed just got home and snuck in behind me. And I see the fog drift down on top of me. And I go over the last bump in the course. I'm going to say hi, Reed to sleep. I go over the last bump in the course, and the fog is just socked right in. And I make a slight navigational error. And I was to come to the apex of a turn in the course and hook a left and follow a maintained trail down into camp for 2.5 miles. And that was it. I had one thing left to do. And I was a bit too far to the west. And when I hit the trail, I drifted into it and then continued following it. and I started pushing and running harder and really like looking and going, okay, you've got to do this. And there's a feature called the Pillars of Death, and they weren't appearing, Pillars of Doom, and they weren't appearing. And I pushed harder and harder. And then I came to a staircase, and there's no staircases in the race. And at that point, the maps that you use are a decade old, and this is a maintained trail that's not even on the map. So it's not on the map, but I know where I am. I know what I've done. And I know in that moment that time has run out and I can't fix my error. And in the intensity of that moment, I made a couple of decisions that I wish I hadn't, but I thought, shoot a bearing, you've got all your pages, get down the mountain, get to the gate, and finish the race. And that's exactly what I did, because I now knew exactly where I was, and I knew if I turned around, I was not going to make it in under 60 hours. I knew that I'd be over time by 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. So I shot down the mountain, bushwhacked down, came to a river that I had to ford. The river was swollen like every other river on the mountain, and it was about 20 feet wide and flowing rapidly. And I looked at it and thought, that's not a good idea. And then I stepped towards it to gauge how deep it was. And I kind of took one step almost too far, and I ended up stepping into the river and was chest deep. And then before I really had a chance to even stop, my body was moving, and I was like, I just jumped into it. Started getting washed downstream, saw one tree protruding from the opposite shore, realized that was my only chance. I managed to get a hand on that and pull myself out the other side. Continued to bushwhack, saw the road into camp from the opposite direction, had 3 minutes left to go, put my head down, ran faster, and then ran the hardest I had run in a while, really, to get to the gate in 60 hours. And the weird part for me in that whole moment was I was coming into camp from the wrong direction, and I come up the road and you get this sight line towards the yellow gate, and there's 30 people there, and they all have their backs to me. They're staring up the slope, wondering where I am, and I grunt, and I just start making a little bit of noise because I can't even like vocalize. Excuse me. And a few people turn around and they recognize that it's me coming in, and I hit the gate and I collapse, and I knew right away that I was 80 to 90% certain that I was not a finisher. And one of the first things I was saying was, I have all my pages and I swam a river, and it's okay if it doesn't count, because I knew that I had made a critical error in the end. So that's the 10-minute answer to your question that you asked of like, so, and then I've seen the video of me coming across the finish line, and the interesting part about it is that I didn't hear anything. I was really just buried so deep in that moment. There's applause in the video. I had no idea. I really didn't hear any of that when I came across. I was like devoid of external recognition for a brief period of time while I was getting my wherewithal again. And I've questioned since then many things, but one of the things that I feel like is, even when I was dropping down the mountain, in the wrong direction, there was a period of time where I wasn't 100% certain I was on the right side of the mountain. I wasn't sure that having gotten lost in the fog hadn't placed me on the exact opposite side. And I briefly feared that I was going to drop off the wrong side of the mountain and entirely just run out of all the gas that I had left. And I don't know that I had much left in me beyond the 60 hours. And if I had turned around, I may have struggled to even exert more energy beyond the time frame that I put out there.
It was a heartbreaking moment to witness as a filmmaker and as a friend, because I think there's a bit of an echo. I don't know. I think it probably on my end there goes. It's gone now. But as a filmmaker, you want to document the moment, and as a friend, all you want to do is help your friend who's collapsed on the ground, whose mouth is moving, saying words, but no voice is coming out, because you know that they have gone well beyond what their body would have allowed them. The footage is amazing, Gary. The footage is amazing in the sense that it it's terrifying. It's extremely difficult to watch.
You were sobbing, holding the camera.
Yeah, they don't need to know that.
He was crying like
Um,
a baby. He's a baby.
I mean, I'm still like, I'm really emotional even
tonight, right?
Yeah, we're gonna edit out. We're gonna edit out the last 20 minutes.
Makes me feel a lot better.
It's one of the things in my life that I've witnessed that I would never wish on anybody, but I would wish on everyone, because we left that afternoon. Again, we didn't really get a chance to like decompress because you obviously were sleeping. Because imagine what your body goes through when you don't sleep for 60 hours.
Well, it was such an interesting thing after that, because after I was able to collect myself to a point of accepting my fate, and it just felt like such a weird energy because nobody knew what to say or do, and I just was, everything was focused on me, and I did my best in that moment to just try to lighten the mood a little bit and thank everybody for everything. And then Linda and I went back to the tent, and I slept for a couple hours, and when I woke up, most of the camp had cleared out because it's midday, late day Monday at this point. I didn't get a chance to really see or properly thank a lot of people. But one of the interesting things that a lot of people don't even realize is John Kelly and I actually missed each other on course going in opposite directions. So we passed somewhere in the Stallion Mountain area where it's very easy in that area to just simply be one spine over 100 feet away and not see the other person. So we didn't actually see each other. And I thought that his book pages would still correlate being one page earlier than mine, as they had all race. So as I'm going through the race, I'm pulling pages out of the books and John's aren't gone. And then I get into books that are sopping wet and I can't pull the pages apart. So I was leaving John's page and my page and then pulling the next page out of the book so that I wasn't taking John's page from him. And I got deeper and deeper and deeper. And I was like, did John, like, what happened to John? His pages are all still here. And then I finished and went through all of that. And John gave me a hug and we chatted briefly. And it wasn't until I woke up 2 hours later that Jamil Curry told me that John had finished. I didn't know. And I felt horrible. I was like, of course he finished. He was sitting in the chair. But with everything that was unfolding and transpiring for me, I had no recognition of anything. And nobody told me. Like, my experience in those hours was unique to me. And it wasn't until Jamil said, John finished. I went, what? Excuse me? And that's why I got up after a few hours and got out of the tent and then hung out with, thankfully John was still there. But I actually felt really bad afterwards for not recognizing that John was a finisher and not being able to spend time with him at his finish and spend more time congratulating him on what he had accomplished.
It's, the community itself was wonderful all weekend. When John finished, he asked if you had finished or if you had come through. He asked,
like, where's Gary?
Where's Gary?
Like
One of the first things.
Yeah.
And Laz, his, experience with both John finishing and with you finishing is just, he was such a wonderful guy. You could tell that, as much as his character wants him to be like, Gary, well, maybe next year, that sort of thing. But he gave you a hug and told you, words that are between you two, I'm sure. But it was amazing how much the community came together for each other there. So the fact that you didn't say that to John, I'm sure John understood what you had gone.
But I also,
totally.
I look at the video and I just wish I had known so that I could have at least given 10 seconds to John rather than just it. Yeah. I view it through a different lens now with more information, and I wish I had known at the time that he had been a finisher so I could have properly congratulated him on the spot rather than later.
I think this interview might be testament to the answer to this, but is it still raw? Is it something that you're able to process a little bit more?
Well, I'm really, honest to God, like, I didn't think that I was going to struggle as much as I did with recollecting a lot of the process tonight. It was definitely a very difficult period of acceptance afterwards, and there was this pendulum that was solidly stuck in like massive disappointment, and I knew that being proud of what I accomplished was on the opposite side, and it slowly started to swing back and forth, and I managed to get over to the side of where I'm really proud of what I accomplished. And things take me off guard sometimes. Like, I went for a run last week and I popped on my music and there were like 2 songs for that entire 5th lap that really got played multiple times.
There's a lot of questions about what you were listening to when this all went down.
And one of those songs just came on while I was running, and I just all of a sudden had an emotional response to the whole thing. So I didn't think it was going to play out this way tonight. So yeah, it is still, I have moments, but it doesn't, like, on my day-to-day, it doesn't like plague my existence. I don't wake up morose and yearning for something that was not. But yeah, I guess talking about it in this regard, and the fact that you guys were there and have been there for 2 years, I think also just pulls from a different emotional string that I probably wasn't prepared for.
Sure. But if anything, if this also might be testament to how you feel about it, but you've already, to kind of segue into some of the conversation that I wanted to get to before we wrap up this show, that's Nolan's 14. So you're obviously at a place where you're still inspired to get out there and take on new challenges. Nolan's 14 is by no means a slouch challenge. I know nothing about it because I've never attempted it. I haven't even been to the Colorado mountains, let alone summited a 14er. But Nolan's 14, what is the draw for that for you? And what is it like now processing out of Barkley and setting a new goal here?
Well, it feels nice to look beyond for a period of time, and I'm really excited about the whole Nolans thing. So a year ago, myself and Jared at the Barkley spent 47 hours together, and then afterwards started making some potential adventure plans together. I was an absolute mess after Barkley last year because in the 10 months leading into the race, I also did the Hurt 100, the UTMF Mount Fuji 100. I ran around Mount Rainier and we had a kid. So by the time I finished Barkley, I couldn't understand why my physical capacity just kept crashing. And eventually, after months, I accepted I was a shell of myself and I needed a break, and I took 6 months off. I hardly ran, I hardly trained. I didn't put on a running race bib between Barkley 16 and Barkley 17. And even 6 months before Barkley this year, I was still curious as to if I was even going to get myself back to 100% to be able to do the training. I had a great ski touring season, which set me up for the final training block for Barkley really successfully, because I got my fitness back and there's no impact from the skiing side of things. So that I feel like has to be prefaced before I say I feel really good right now, comparatively, especially compared to a year ago. I tried to get going a year ago and kept crashing and just kept facing issues. And I told Jared we were planning to do Nolans if I felt like my recovery was going well. And we finally confirmed a week ago that that's going to be the case. Things are going well. I'm feeling really good, but I'm feeling good because I took 6 months off after last year's race. And people need to know how important that is in the grand scheme of racing and recovery and planning. If I hadn't done that, I would be burying myself for years to come. So Jared and I are doing a Nolan's attempt at the end of July. It's 14,000 foot peaks in about 100 miles. It has a lot of the same crossover with Barkley. There's a 60-hour cutoff to be an official finisher of it. There's a bunch of Barkley finishers that are also Nolan's finishers. There's only been, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe 16 ever finishers of Nolan's. It has a 15% finish rate. It has 45,000 feet of climbing and descent. Barkley has 67, but it's all at altitude. You're basically, if you're tagging 14ers, you're rarely going below 13, certainly not 12 and a half. That's the huge challenge, especially for myself coming from sea level. So I am scared about the altitude challenge of Nolan's very much so. That's going to be the interesting one more than the physical side of things. But what I'm really looking forward to is spending time with Jared, and the fact that if you type in Nolan's 14ers and hit the image bar on Google, you'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, this is phenomenal. That's what I'm looking forward to, is just getting up in the alpine terrain and really doing something in a different area that's just got such visual reward the whole way through.
Do you have a time window? I know you kind of briefly mentioned it, but do you have it's
a 60-hour, like under 60 for an official finish. So that's the goal. And then Jared and I are hoping for a best case scenario, which would be right in range with where the faster times have been, hopefully. So Jared and I are actually going to do a Utah 13ers route 3 weeks prior to that as kind of an acclimation thing for myself. And Luke Nelson will be joining us for that, which I'm really excited about because, again, it is another really cool aesthetic mountain route. And that may even be more challenging than Nolan's because I'll be going from sea level to those 13ers with that helping my acclimatization towards Nolan's.
Big time. I can imagine that you doing the 13ers will be a huge benefit going into something like Nolan's. I feel like we could talk about Nolan's for another hour or something like that. We are going to have to wrap up the main show just because we do have Gary for a limited amount of time. So I want to make sure that we get the post show with our Patreon supporters to get all. Kim, you pulled aside how many additional questions here? Like
1 million.
1 million additional questions. I want to answer the question of what Gary's music was. People are still like,
if Gary wants to share.
Right. But I feel we'll do that in the post show because people are like, he dodged the question about music. And then now they're listing off Smash Mouth, Shakira,
New Kids,
Proclaimers.
I wonder if the person who said Smash Mouth knows that at my February race, I give away a $50 gift certificate before the race starts. It's my way of getting people, and the information's in the pre-race briefing that I email. So it's my way of getting them to read the pre-race email. So you need to read it for a chance. And what I did was actually gave away the $50 to someone who knew the lyrics to Smash Mouth and had them sing it in front of 250 runners. So I wonder if that person who mentioned Smash Mouth knows anything about that.
That's the first time, and I hope last time we mentioned Smash Mouth on the show.
I feel like we might have talked about it recently because you've been like annoying me with Smash Mouth.
There was one morning where I woke up and was singing, "Somebody once told me," to plant the seed in Kim's head. Sure enough,
12 hours later.
12 hours later, Kim starts singing it, and it's like, victory. We still have a lot to talk to Gary about, lots of questions that remain unanswered. We're going to talk a little bit more about Nolan's and a little bit more about kind of summer plans and make sure that you learn more about Gary's races. Speaking of which, before we move into that post show, Gary, there are going to be residual questions that people won't get a chance to ask in the post show. But where can people find you on social media in case they want to reach out and follow?
Yeah, I feel like we just got a chance to touch on the tip of the iceberg. I do want to say to anybody that actually cares, like I do have full intent of writing a blog posting. It takes me quite a while, and I actually sat down a week ago to try to do it, and I just didn't have the headspace for it. So it's personal, like as you saw, unfortunately. So I will pen. That's 100% going to happen. I hoped it would have happened by now, but eventually. Social media stuff is GaryRobbins.ca is my home page that links to all the races I do. So if you're interested in the races that I produce or manage, it's through there, and that links to my blog site, which is GaryRobbinsRun.com. And I'm on all the other stuff under Gary Robbins or some version of that.
I highly encourage you guys just to go follow him across, including Strava and all that good stuff. For those who might be familiar with my channel or unfamiliar, maybe you're a new viewer to the Ginger Runner channel. One of my largest race movies to date is the Squamish 50-50 film that I made a couple of years ago, where I ran one of Gary's races, which is notoriously difficult, the Squamish 50 miler. Followed the next morning by the Squamish 50K, which is a new race series that he put on that year called the Squamish 50-50. It is an incredible challenge. I encourage many of you guys to take it upon yourselves to give it a shot. And girls, of course. I didn't mean to specify just guys.
Guys is, yeah. Guys is guys and girls.
Guys and girls. People.
Not according to some people.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
But I highly encourage you to... Gus, you okay? Gus, we gave Gus a tambourine. Actually, yeah. He's scratching. Run one of Gary's races. He does a whole incredible series, Coast Mountain Trail series. Sorry, my Canadian's a little off. Coast Mountain Trail series up in Vancouver and British Columbia. All the races are incredible. So we'll be running a bunch of them. Especially once we move back up. I feel like we'll do one every weekend if we can. But I encourage you guys to go check them out. Go check out the websites and see if any of them align with your schedule. If they do it.
I also think a lot of you already signed up for Squamish.
A lot of people have talked about Squamish in the chat room here.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to say before we run off real quick, sorry, is we just literally got back a couple of hours ago from a trip this weekend into the Okanagan, which is about a 4 to 4.5 hour drive from here. And I want to say congratulations to my lovely wife for running 50K Ultra. And she said before the race, I think I'll run 7 hours. So she decided to run 7 hours and X amount of seconds, because that's what happens when you've been doing this forever and you're super pro at it. So congratulations to Linda on nailing.
Podium.
Yeah, it was fun to see that.
And also a big congratulations and a shout out to Linda, Gary's wife, for being such an amazing support crew, taking care of Reed and being there for Gary at Barkley and everything like that. It's always great to see such a cool couple take care of each other and be there for each other. including you guys especially. It's just awesome. For the post show, we are going to do a post show with Gary. Basically what happens is every week after the main show, we take our guest and we take them, put them into a tiny little room. We get to have rapid fire questions at them provided by you guys. So if you would like to join us in the post show and get those questions answered, all you have to do is go to patreon.com/thegingerrunner. For as little as $1 a month, you support this channel. Everything that we do, from this podcast to the films to the reviews, everything. It's as little as $1 a month. That gets you access to all of the post shows and some other cool content. And there's different levels depending on, if you guys want to help support at different levels, you can do that. And it's a non-committal, it's a monthly thing. So stay as long as you want or go as quickly as you want.
And don't forget, you guys, there are still a few head wraps available, right?
Oh yeah, like a handful of them.
Why are you looking at me like that?
Oh, I wasn't. I was looking around for the pile of head wraps that are still remaining. If you guys want some, go to gingerrunnerstore.com.
Yep.
We'll be packaging them up and shipping them out this week, and that'll be the last of them pretty much.
Yes.
And that's it. Otherwise, we'll tease this at the end of this main show here with Gary. Yes, I am making a documentary following Gary's 2 Barkley attempts, 2016 and 2017. There's still stuff to be filmed, including interviews with Gary, Laz, and John, and a couple other people. So that will be coming later this year. And Gary, do you want to divulge some of the
I got super jealous of Ethan's bromance on a decade on film tour. Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. Him and I were texting. We're like, what are these guys up to right now?
Chugga chugga, what?
What?
What are they?
So I was like, well, if Brian gets to go on a film tour, then I want to do that too. So yeah, Ethan and I we're making plans to take the film on a film tour. And I'm sure at that point in time, I'll be able to coherently discuss the entire episode without having any serious flashbacks like tonight.
Flashbacks are fine. I mean, I think it was great that this was live because it showed Gary, man. It showed true Gary, just how kind and humble you are. It's great to be able to take down a little bit of the wall that a lot of elite athletes put up, just in the sense that we know that they're great, but it's also great to see that they can be normal, humanize you a little bit. But yes, we are doing a tour this fall. The dates are to be determined, but I promise you they're going to be big.
Every city in North America.
That's how big.
It's just going to be Edmonton every night.
Edmonton Oilers every night.
That's right.
Are the Oilers here? We got to do it again tomorrow night.
Yeah, we're following the Edmonton Oilers for an 82-game schedule.
Andrea, Brian's wife, says, this is Brian, signed in as Andrea. Can all three of us go on? Yes. Can we all go on a double feature tour?
Only if Andrea, Linda, and I can all go on our own some sort of tour.
Like the Yaya tour?
Girls on Trails.
Girls Gone Wild. That's what it is.
Girls Got Wild on Trails.
Save it for the post show, guys. Yes, Brian, yes. Chugga Chugga Bigfoot, all that good stuff. It's nice to see Brian is in the chat room too, under Andrea's account. We'll never know who is who.
Oh, yeah, Andrea.
So stick around, everyone. We're going to be doing a post show with Gary here in just a couple of seconds. For those of you who are already on Patreon, the link is already there. It's ready for you to go jump into the chat room. We're going to wrap up this main show. Thank you again, Gary Robbins. Thank you, as always,
Brian's
for taking the time out.
And Brian sent me a most wonderful email, and I thank you very much for that. He's a wonderful person, and I love the video that you guys happen to make together. Thank you. Post show. All right. Bye. Thanks for having me.
We'll see you guys in just a couple of seconds. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Every Monday at 6 p.m. we do Ginger Runner Live with a new guest each week, as well as new videos every single Friday. Just subscribe to the channel. You'll be updated as soon as they go live just by clicking the little bell icon next to the subscribe button. We're almost at 100,000 subscribers. I'd like to reach it by the end of the year. I think we could do it. I think we can do it. We'd be the first ultra running channel to reach that.
All right.
Yeah. So glad Kim supports this. We'll see you guys in the post show. Thanks for tuning in tonight.
Ginger Runner.